Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for Employment Issues and Solutions for People with Hearing Loss and Their Employer. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping matters. First, thank you very much to Lisa Johnston of Alternative Communication Services for providing CART this evening. Thanks so much, Lisa. During the course of the first part of the webinar with Chuck Conaty, you're going to see 3 very short PSA videos. You'll see the screen come up, but most likely they won't play on your end unless you click play. So when we're ready, I'll go ahead and just say 1, 2, 3, go. That'll be your cue to click play on your end, and hopefully we'll start and end about the same time. Lastly, please use the chat box for any questions that you may have. I'll voice those questions to Chuck and Teresa at the end of their presentations. We have a lot of slides to get through tonight, so I'm hoping that we will have some time for questions as well. I am honored to introduce you to Chuck Conaty. He's the Business Development Specialist at ODEP, or the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor. Teresa Goddard is the Sensory Team Lead for the Job Accommodation Network at West Virginia University. And I am just thrilled to have them this evening to present on this important topic. It's one that we get a lot of questions about, and thrilled to have them. Chuck, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started first.
Well, good evening, folks. This is Chuck Conaty, and I'm here in Northern Virginia, and I do work for the Office of Disability Employment Policy, which is an agency of the United States Department of Labor. We are led by an assistant secretary, and we're on pins and needles seeing who is going to be nominated to be our next assistant secretary. We've had some great ones, and the agency has come a long, long way since it was first an idea in the Clinton administration, and then it became a reality during the Bush administration and matured during the Obama administration. The history of ODEP and I convened because I used to be in the private sector, and I am here because I have a hearing loss. I noticed this hearing loss when I was working for Paramount Pictures, and I was in a theater in San Francisco, and we were screening a reel of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I had 2 Academy Award winners on either side of me, and they started describing the quality of the sound as Indy was driving down a street after his first adventure, and they're talking about the quality of the sound of the cicadas. And I was sitting there thinking, what cicadas? And I knew that everything I had been working for, because right out of school I went into the professional sound business and actually started the company that I sold to Paramount Pictures. And I knew that my career as a sound person was rapidly coming to an end. I didn't do much about dealing with the sound other than refocus my attention to other parts of studio operations, and then I went on to other businesses, and fortunately ended up in the Office of Disability Employment Policy. Well, enough about me. But what the Office of Disability Employment Policy is primarily a policy office. And if you could move the slide forward, Barbara. Or I can do this here, I guess. Yes. We're the only federal agency that coordinates with employers and government to increase the employment of people with disabilities. We're primarily a policy shop. And as policy shop, we do analysis, technical assistance, and development of innovative practices and strategies. The group that I'm with is in the education and outreach, and you'll see a few of our products later on in this presentation. We work with employers, employees, and with all of the disability community. We try to be a catalyst for change. We're too small to be much more than that, and that's a big charge for us to be able to be a catalyst. There are only 51 people within the agency, and it's been that level for years and years. But we base our policies on evidence-based research. We build collaborative relationships, and you'll see some of those relationships a little bit later. We deliver authoritative and credible data. For instance, you'll see in just a few moments our disability employment statistics. We worked on that, well, if you believe it, for 10 years before they were actually published. Surveys were reviewed and approved and denied, and for the sake of the good folks who came up with these surveys, I give them a real high five. And then we have a variety of employment-related programs and initiatives. So as of February 2017, the labor force participation for people with and without disabilities, and you can find this information on the Bureau of Labor Statistics site. You can see that people with disabilities participate in the labor force at a rate of only 20%. It means 8 out of 10 people with disabilities are not even counted in the workforce, whereas people without disabilities, approximately 7 out of 10 are. And so what does it mean to be in the workforce? Well, it means you have a job, you're looking for a job, and if you have not had a job for up to 4 weeks, then you're counted as being out of the workforce. So we work to increase the participation of people with disabilities in the workforce so that those who participate can have a good employment rate. The unemployment rate actually ticked up by a percentage point last month to 10.2%. Of course, that's not all that good. People without disabilities were averaging 4.7%. Some of the things that we do, and I'm going to move through my presentation rather rapidly because the presentation that I think will be most of interest to all you folks will be from my colleague Teresa Goddard from our Job Accommodation Network, one of the programs that we fund. Anyway, you may have heard about National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Throughout the month of October, we focus on activities and coordinate activities and work with folks throughout the land to recognize and celebrate the contributions of America's workers with disabilities. The 2016 theme was #InclusionWorks. And this is an example of our poster. And by the way, if you get the PDF of this presentation, you will be in the PowerPoint version, be able to see that everything is compliant and accessible. We're working on the 2017 poster, and we have just about come to a theme, and that should be released probably at the end of April, the beginning of May. At that time, different organizations throughout the land start working with us, working among themselves to highlight what can be done by persons with disabilities in the workforce. One of our premier outreach programs is the Campaign for Disability Employment. It's a nationwide campaign funded by ODEP, and what made it unique, and still is unique, is that it's developed by a public-private collaboration with leading business and disability organizations. Later you'll see the names of those organizations. It features public service announcements which have been so successful that we were actually quite astounded at how successful they were. We have posters, ads, and other website print materials and social media. and practical ideas to promote disability employment. We really went outside the box with this whole effort. It came about because of our assistant secretary at the time saw the Office of Disability Employment as a jewel that just hadn't been discovered yet, and he wanted to do something to allow us to increase the range of what we do. So he gathered some of the top organizations in the nation around the table and said, come up with some ideas. And what they came up with was the idea of the Campaign for Disability Employment. One of the main products of this campaign has been public service announcements. We have 3 of them, and all told, they have been aired almost 250,000 times since the first one aired in March of 2010. The first one got us off at about 66,000 airings. It aired in theaters nationwide, and its theme, its key message is that at work, it's what people can do that matters. We accentuate the positive. So what I'm going to ask Nancy to do now is put up the I Can PSA, which, by the way, ran yesterday at the SHRM Law and Legislative Conference before 600 HR professionals.
All right, I'm just going to stop there for 1 second. If it doesn't automatically play on your end, go ahead and click the play button. So 1, 2, 3, go.
I can solve difficult problems for a Fortune 500 company.
Thank you, Nancy. If you can take that down and bring us up to the next PSA, or the next slide, pardon me. Okay, thank you. The next PSA was because, and it was focused on youth. And I'm not going to show that because I'm looking at the time, and if I play this PSA, I'm not going to have allowed enough time for Teresa to give her great presentation. Anyway, this is the one that started to blow the numbers right out of the water. The NAB dollar value is what we would have had to pay if we had paid for presenting this public service announcement. It was in the top 1% of PSAs in 2013, and it is still running in the top 10%. It's shown at the Indianapolis 500. It's been shown at the Daytona 500, a wide variety of audiences. And it's the first one that went over 100,000. Let me take to the next slide here. This one is our latest, and I will tell you that we are just beginning to work on our 4th. This is a PSA that focuses on who people are and what they do. So Nancy, if you would run that one, please. Who I am.
Sorry about that. 1 moment.
No, that's the next one. That's the one that follows, Nancy.
Pardon?
This is not the one. It's the one that's prior to this one.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Nancy, if you are having a problem there, I can run with this one. We can go with it. I can take it.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason it's giving me an error on that one, but I would just want to let you know that we can post the URLs for the 3 PSAs along with the recording of the webinar and your PowerPoint.
Terrific. This PSA was produced by the Professional Baseball Athletic Trainers Society. It is, PBATS, as it's also known, is an alliance partner of ODEP, the Office of Disability Employment Policy. And what we have in these alliances is agreements with various organizations to work together to find unique solutions and to basically move the ball forward in the employment of people with disabilities. This particular PSA was created by PBATS with a little bit of input from us, but I think that you will like the story that you're about ready to see and hear. So if you would, folks in the audience, if you just go ahead and play it. If Barbara has it synced up, I'll play it at the same time.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, go.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to flip right past this one, and we've gone. When you see the slides, you will see the alliances we have. One of them, as I mentioned, is with the Society for Human Resource Management, and it's 290,000 members. It's a direct connection with people who are making recruiting, hiring, and promotion decisions, and we're really proud of our association with them. I'll speak for a few minutes about our few programs that we have. The Workforce Recruitment Program is a recruitment and referral program primarily for federal employees, but we have now branched out into the private sector. The idea is to hire young and old college graduates, recent graduates who are looking for internships within the federal government and the private sector. It's available through WRP.gov, WRP.gov and WRPjobs.org. And you can see that we've been able to place a lot of folks there. We also have policy and technical assistance resources, which are primarily for practitioners in the field. The Employment Assistance and Resource Network on Disability Inclusion, also known as EARNE, helps employers and hire and retain workers with disabilities. Check out AskEARNE.org. And then JAN, which you're going to hear more about from Teresa, is the leading source of free, expert, and confidential guidance on accommodations. And they're at AskJan.org. They actually predate ODEP, and we're proud to have them on our team. A relatively new center has been the LEAD Center, and it's primarily involved in integrated employment and economic self-sufficiencies with adults across the spectrum of disabilities. And then our latest excuse me, this is not our latest. Another one that has been with us for a while is NCWD, which focuses primarily on youth. And then PEAT, which is Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. It's only a couple of years old, but it's making great strides. I urge you to go to their site. They have ways to help you make sure that websites are accessible, assistive technology. It's just a fabulous, fabulous organization. And if you want to find out more about us, we're at www.dol.gov/ODEP. So with that, I will turn it over to Nancy or to Teresa, however you want to handle it from here, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. I know Teresa has a lot of really great information too, so I'll go ahead, Teresa, and let you get started. Teresa, be sure you've clicked your talk button. I'm not hearing anything yet.
Okay, Nancy, do we have sound yet?
Yes, now I can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Sorry about that little hiccup. So again, I'm Teresa Goddard with the Job Accommodation Network. I'm the sensory team lead there. I came to the sensory team because I have a background in speech-language pathology and audiology. And even when I was going to school to become a speech-language pathologist, I actually always wanted to work at JAN. I saw a presentation by Beth Loy, one of our consultants here, when I was just a graduate student, and I thought, gee, I wish I could go work for JAN. So today what I want to do is give you just a brief overview of the Job Accommodation Network and what we do. We'll talk about some typical issues experienced in the workplace and some situations and solutions. And then finally I'll take you on a brief tour of our website before we get into the questions. So JAN has been around for over 30 years. We actually started off here at West Virginia University as a pilot program, and the reason for that was because of the rehabilitation program that was here at WVU at the time, and that continues to be at WVU until this day. Now when we started off, we were actually not under the Office of Disability Employment Policy at work. At first we started off as a project for the committee that eventually came to be known as, let me see, well, it's the President's Committee on the Employment of People with Disabilities. And so that was quite some time ago. Now we're funded by ODEP, and what we do is provide technical assistance on Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act and one-on-one consultation on workplace accommodations. We do quite a bit of that. We have a very small staff, but we do take over 50,000 contacts a year. And the reason we're able to take so many is that everything that we do is remote. We either do it by telephone or by internet. We like to think we're pretty easy to use. We try to be anyway, and we're always updating our website. We have, I forgot to mention, we also do technical assistance on some related laws like the Rehabilitation Act, and we have a team that deals with entrepreneurship as well. So if you're out there and thinking of starting your own business, you could always call in and talk to our entrepreneurship team. They would be happy to speak with you. All of our consultants have at least a master's degree in a field that's related to our mission. And our services are free to you. It's all funded by the Office of Disability Employment Policy. Anybody can contact us from anywhere in the nation. And of course, we will keep your information confidential. All of our services are always free and always confidential. Now, in addition to the calls and customized trainings like the one that I'm doing for you tonight, something else that we do is research on the costs and benefits of accommodations in the workplace. So we have something that we call the JAN study, and through that study, We've been finding information about how much it costs to provide an accommodation and what types of benefits employers experience when they do provide an accommodation. And all of that data is summarized in a publication on our website called Workplace Accommodations, Low Cost, High Impact. I'm going to tell you about a few of the findings. So in the most recent segment of our study, over 2,000 employers have been interviewed, 2,339 to be exact. And some of the findings were that employers want to provide accommodations so that they can retain valued and qualified employees. Most employers report no cost or a relatively low cost for accommodating employees with disabilities. In fact, over 50% of accommodations typically don't cost the employer anything more than the cost of bringing on any other employee. Employers do report that accommodations are effective, and they experience multiple both direct and indirect benefits after making accommodations. We're going to talk about what a few of those things are. And employers also report that they find JAN helpful during the accommodation process. Next, I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that employees who are deaf or hard of hearing report to us. These are the things that they report to us that they're having difficulty with on the job. So one thing that you might expect is interacting with customers, with supervisors, and with coworkers. It can be very challenging to have a face-to-face conversation with someone or a conversation by phone if you have a hearing loss. Receiving information, for example, during a training, can be very challenging, and so can asking questions. A communication by phone, as you might expect, is something that we get a lot of calls on. And sometimes we also get calls about meeting safety standards. For example, if someone is wearing a hearing aid, but they're also required to wear hearing protection on their job, that can be a big issue, especially if the person would prefer to keep their hearing aids in while they're also wearing ear protection. You need to make sure that the person is wearing the right type of hearing protection for that. And ODEP actually gives us a wonderful resource on how to make sure that someone is complying with Title I of the ADA, and also OSHA has their own set of standards. And if you're in a situation where you're accommodating someone who needs to wear hearing protection, I invite you to call in, and I'd be happy to talk to you. Responding to auditory signals like alarms can be a big issue. And taking vital signs is also something that may require something like a specialized stethoscope. I want to take a minute to talk about JAN's interactive process. Now, when an employer and an employee are trying to come up with their ideas for what they're going to do, the process is not one-sided. Both sides have a role to play. So the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is in charge of enforcing this part of this law, says that there should be an interactive process. They recommend it, but they don't technically require it. And so because of that, JAN came up with a 6-step process for employers who want to use a process to make sure that they are following steps in an appropriate and structured way. Now, some employers have their own process for going through the process of choosing an accommodation, and as long as it works, I think that's okay. But JAN's process is step 1, either to make an accommodation request or to recognize when your employee has made an accommodation request. Next, the employee might need to provide some information from their doctor that explains why they need an accommodation and how they are covered under ADA. Step 3 would be exploring accommodation options, because there might be more than one way to solve the issue. Step 5 in the JAN process is to implement the accommodation. And step 6 is to monitor the accommodation, kind of make sure that everything is continuing to work. And of course, we hope that will lead to a successful accommodation. Now, a lot of the accommodations I'm going to be talking with you about tonight involve assistive technology. And what is assistive technology? Well, it can really be anything, any piece of equipment that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. It could be something very simple like a pencil grip like the kinds that little children use when they're first learning how to write. Helps them to grip the pencil more easily. Or it could be something very complex, like, for example, a piece of software that's used to access a video relay service so that a person who is deaf can interact with an interpreter to complete a telephone call. So it could be high-tech or low-tech. Sometimes there are mainstream type things that we use as assistive technology, and one example would be an iPad. Many people use iPads or iPhones or other types of tablets and phones and apps on those in order to do different parts of their job a little bit more easily or get through their daily life a little bit more easily. So assistive technology really could be something that most of us use every day, but maybe a person with a disability uses it in a special way. Or it could be something very specialized that you might only be able to get through an assistive technology dealer or something like that. It could be hardware, like an amplified phone, or it could be software that lets you access the relay service. So there are a lot of different types of assistive technology. Some can be very expensive and very specialized. Some can be mainstream, and some can be very inexpensive. We're going to look at some examples that cross the range. Okay, so I'm having a little trouble advancing the slide. Let me try one more time. There we go. So I keep using this word accommodation, and if you're not really immersed in the world of disability, that might be an unfamiliar term, so I want to take a moment to define it. A reasonable accommodation could be any type of change in the way we do things at work or a change in the work environment itself. So for instance, if someone is using a wheelchair and in order to access a building that they need to get into, they need a ramp, that would be a change in the environment. And that's an example of a reasonable accommodation. But accommodations don't always have to be things that we buy or things that we build. Another type of reasonable accommodation could be for an employer to hire an interpreter for a job interview if someone is deaf and needs to use American Sign Language to communicate during their interview. And there are a lot of examples of accommodations. It could be something like changing a work schedule. It could be reassigning someone to a different position, but often it involves acquiring or changing some type of equipment that's used on the job. And at JAN, we often will talk about a process for assessing someone's need for assistive technology for specialized equipment. So the first thing that we suggest is to ask the person about the challenge that they're experiencing. The person may be able to tell us how they've resolved a similar issue in the past. Another key thing to do is to try to figure out which parts of the job are essential and which might be marginal functions that someone else could do instead. And you want to be open to creative solutions. There might be a very simple way to solve an issue that you just haven't thought of. Or there might be some product that you've never even heard of before. And so it's important for both employers and employees to kind of be open to various things that might work. It's almost like a brainstorming process initially to try to figure out the different options that may work. Now once you've gotten an idea, you want to test it, make sure that it's actually working. And when you're implementing an accommodation, there may be a need to provide some training, especially if it's equipment or software that a person has never used before. Someone from the IT department might need to help install software or configure something so that it meets the person's needs. And we think that there should be a point person somewhere in the employer's organization that the person who is working can go to whenever they have an issue or a question. So you want to leave the employee in good hands so that they know there's someone they can contact. Now I want to look at some accommodation examples just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that people will request when they're trying to get an accommodation, something changed at work, and also to give you an idea of the kinds of things that employers are willing to provide. Okay, so here we have an example of a nurse with a hearing impairment. She worked the night shift and had to talk to doctors who called for information. She was having some difficulty hearing over the telephone. The employee asked to be moved to a day shift where there would be other nurses who could talk to the doctors, but there just weren't any openings on the day shift. So these telephone issues come up a lot. Let's see what happened. So in this particular case, the employer reported back to us that they bought a telephone amplifier. So that's something that makes the sound of the telephone a little bit louder so that someone who is experiencing hearing loss can hear it more easily. Now there are also various types of adapters that can actually send the sound from a telephone directly into your hearing aid if you have one, and that can be very handy. So here we have that the cost was not reported, but we did eventually get data back that it cost about $50. A range of $40 to $50 is typical for a basic amplifier, although they can go up in price. I'm going to show you an example of one that's very adjustable that costs a bit more. Now we don't have the benefit data on this one. Now, as I mentioned, telephone issues are very common. That's usually one of the first things that a person will request accommodation for in the workplace. Some of the newer hearing aids have something called Bluetooth technology. So if a person has been issued Bluetooth-enabled hearing aids and is using a streaming device, something that they would wear on a lanyard around their neck along with their hearing aids, you can purchase adapters to enable you to use that to access an office telephone. Plantronics is one vendor that has those, just as an example. On this slide we have a picture of the Speech Adjust a Tone, which is a type of amplifier that's been around for a long time. One thing that I really like about the Speech Adjust a Tone is that you can use the little sliders that you see there in the photograph to adjust the amplification up and down for various frequencies. Now, nothing is as adjustable as a hearing aid that's been programmed by your audiologist, but with the Speech Adjust a Tone, you can actually get a good bit of customization. Depending on the model that you purchase, some of these are suitable for those who have a telecoil in their hearing aids. So if that's something you would like, you want to look for the product that has that feature. The base model is about $155, but if you start looking at the models that have more features, it can go up to around $200. We can also set somebody up for captioned telephone calls as part of an accommodation. They might get their captions on a little screen right on the telephone. Some of the newer Cisco phones have a screen built in that can access captioning services. Or you might use some type of a service like CapTel or a software program like IPTTY to access those types of captioned calls via the internet. A lot of people will also use relay services to access an interpreter for their phone calls. You might need some specialized equipment for that. A lot of people just use a basic amplified phone. And some people, of course, will use alternate methods of communication so they don't have to use the phone as much. So some examples would be instant messaging and things like email. Let's look at another example. This one involves an electric serviceman with progressive hearing loss. He sometimes worked in a bucket truck and needed to communicate to coworkers, but they usually talked on two-way radios, which was really a big issue for him. In this particular case, the employer switched from using two-way radios to using cell phones, and that way the employee was able to use text messaging to communicate with the team. Now, as accommodations go, this next one was fairly expensive, about $500, but it improved communication and kept a valuable employee for the company. Now, when there is a one-time cost for an accommodation, the typical cost, it kind of fluctuates between about $500 and $600, depending on really the year. Some years when we do our numbers, we find that a typical cost is about $500. Some years when we run the numbers, it's about $600. Let's look at another one. A federal employer contacted Jan seeking a telephone signaler that would work with digital phone lines, because there are a lot of signalers out there that are really just designed for your old analog landline phones. They needed one that would work on a digital phone line. And why did they need that? Well, they had an employee who was hard of hearing, and they needed a visual way for him to know that his telephone was ringing, so he could pick it up and talk on the phone. So in this particular case, the Jan consultant sent them some information on a product that was supposed to work with PBX systems, which was the kind that they had. And what we always suggest is that you contact the vendor directly so that you can ask pertinent details about compatibility, about return policies in case it doesn't work, and to get the most up-to-date pricing information. And then during a follow-up call, we found out from the employer that they had provided a headset and also a strobe light to attach to the phone at the employee's workstation. And they reported a one-time cost of about $100, met the employee's accommodation needs, and now the employee was able to function to their maximum potential, which is something that we love to hear. Let's look at another one. A state government employee wanted to attend a lunchtime lecture series. I love attending those myself. So members of the community were going to come in and give talks, and the employees were all invited to attend. And so the employee said, well, I really want to participate, but in order for me to be able to know what's going on, I'm either going to need CART services, I'm going to need, captioning provided during these meetings and trainings, or else I'm going to need an interpreter. And what I'm going to say next might surprise you, but it comes up here all the time. The employer called me wanting to know what they could do instead of CART or an interpreter. Now we all know there's really no substitute for CART or an interpreter. If that's what's needed, that's what's needed. But many times employers do want to know, is there something else that can be used to communicate? What are all of the options? And at Jan, we always give all of the options. But one thing that I always say is, look, I'll tell you about options. But if the person needs an interpreter or they need CART, it's entirely possible that there might not be another effective option that would work quite as well. But at Jan, we try to give you all the options. So we talked about various things. We talked about communication access technologies. That's what we call this category. Some devices that provided automated captioning. Those are generally either software that runs on a PC or perhaps a pair of PCs. Sometimes there might also be an equipment component. And the prices can really range from about $750 up to about $2,000, depending on the features that you want with it. Some of them will do all sorts of bells and whistles, like translate from Spanish into English, as well as doing the captioning. But sometimes you just don't need all of that. One of the companies, Interact AS, that's INTER dash capital A capital S, also sells a version for individuals, but they charge a little bit less for it. But they won't sell that generally to an organization. They want the organization to pay the fee for the organizational license. Now in the end, what they did was provided an interpreter because that was what the individual needed. But that came out of a discussion of the various options that exist and how they all work. We didn't hear how much it cost to provide that interpreter, but we did hear back that an effective accommodation was provided, which is what we like to hear. And of course, employees have a right to equal access to all of the benefits and privileges of employment, and that includes things like trainings and also things that are more like this lecture series, where it might be something that's technically optional, but it's something that's offered to all employees. A person with a disability has a right to equal access to those types of things. On the slide, we have a screenshot of Interact AS, the software program that I mentioned. Another similar type of software is Interpretype. That's INTERPRETYPE. If you want to know more about those communication access technologies, I invite you to call in and speak with me. Another growing field is apps that are designed to run on the smartphone or on a tablet, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit farther on. Let's look at one more. A representative for a provider of pre-employment testing services called us. They wanted to talk about a request that one of their candidates for testing had made. The company did testing for court interpreters, not ASL interpreters, but foreign language interpreters. So the person who needed to take the test said they had a hearing disability, and they really needed to listen to whatever she was listening to at 61 decibels or greater. Now that's a real head scratcher because 61 decibels is about average for conversational speech. To give you a little frame of reference, I'm presenting to you from a very quiet sound-treated room, and it's only about 44 decibels in here. But when I start talking, it comes up to about 60, 65. So part of the test was a recorded exam. You're supposed to listen to instructions, and there's a DVD and a CD, and the person has to interpret what is said. And the person who contacted Jan was really confused about the request because usually they play the recording at 61 dB or higher. And that's what I would expect them to do. So what we suggested was that they asked the candidate to clarify the need for the accommodation and explain that they could increase the volume if it was needed. And we also suggested that the test provider stay focused on testing the individual's language and interpreting skills rather than getting all caught up in the accommodation. And it turned out after they had that conversation, the candidate told them that she had a pocket talker, which is a type of assistive technology that's used for assistive listening. It's basically an amplifier. It's a fairly small one. They run around $130, $140. So she had a personal device that was designed to amplify, and she thought she could just use that for a portion of the test. There was a portion that was to be delivered via headphones. She was a little worried about that section. And in the end, they let her go ahead and bring the pocket talker in and use it. Didn't cost anything to the testing company, and they were able to make a good accommodation for testing. This is an interesting one. A receptionist at an employment services provider, like a staffing agency, was both hard of hearing and had a vision impairment, and also a history of meningitis. As a matter of fact, she was also, he was also undergoing an evaluation to see if he might be developing dementia. They trained for 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, he still wasn't able to get the hang of the phone. So they had talked with this trainee about getting some different phone equipment, maybe trying a different way of training, but they were kind of like, no, I don't need help. So after some conversations with that person, there were some purchases made. They purchased a CCTV, which is used to magnify documents so you can see them a little bit better, a digital recorder so that you can record a conversation and you don't have to take notes, a phone with bump dots to help you find the buttons if you can't see them that well, headset, a tablet for writing that had really large lines, an in and out board with some pictorial representations, and also, this is unusual, they purchased hearing aids and helped with transportation, both of which are unusual for an employer to have to do. The total cost for this accommodation was high. It was $9,780. And at the time of the follow-up, they were still kind of in a trial period to see how everything was working out. But the employer did say that the person was able to come to work and feel productive. Now, it doesn't always work out that way. We had a federal employee who asked the employer to buy hearing aids because they were having trouble communicating at work. And after talking with a Jan consultant, the employer decided they didn't need to buy hearing aids because they felt that they were personal use items that the employee should be responsible for providing. So of course there was no cost-benefit data there. This is another really interesting one. A student employee, I believe they were actually with the WWRP program, had autism spectrum disorder and also used hearing aids. And she needed to talk about project details with her team. But face-to-face communication was really hard, both because of the hearing impairment and also because face-to-face communication was difficult for her on account of her autism spectrum disorder. But on the other hand, the telephone wasn't that great either because of issues with hearing. what they wound up doing was really interesting. They set up a secure instant messaging client so that everybody on the team could talk about projects via chat. And then the employer also worked with the student employee to get some appropriate telephone equipment. Now, we don't know how much it cost to set this up, but the supervisor did tell us that the intern was able to successfully exchange ideas about team projects, and that all of the team members and the supervisor found the chat logs to be very helpful. So in terms of new and emerging technology, I just want to take a couple minutes to tell you about some new things. There are some very interesting apps that are being used for captioning live conversations. These are things that you could put on your phone. Sometimes there's a companion app for a person who might be speaking with you. And it will actually provide live captions of a conversation, let's say if you're sitting in a restaurant, or I've seen them used at conferences when people come up to a booth table to have a discussion. Two that are fairly new are AVA, that's A-V-A. That's an app that's free, but if you wind up using their captioning service for so many minutes a month, they have a subscription program where you pay for so many minutes per month. And there's also a similar one called OV-Chat, that's O-V-I-I Chat. I'm not sure if that's available in the US yet because right now I'm only seeing it being advertised at 4.99 pounds, so it looks like it's being sold through the App Store in England. I'm not sure if you can get it here yet. But a new one that I just learned about was Microsoft Translator. Now that's designed to translate from English into other languages, but before you can translate it, you have to capture the words. So it can also be used for captioning. And the neat thing about it is that you can actually give out a code if you're using it to caption a session, and people can use that code to log in from their own version of the app and see the captions as they're being generated by the speaker. So that's interesting. I saw it demoed side by side with a CART transcriptionist, and I have to tell you the CART transcriptionist was better. But the captions that were being prepared and displayed through Microsoft Translator were actually pretty good. Now the translate function, I can't speak to how good it was, but the actual captioning was not too bad. I'm seeing a question, yes, that's OV little I. Now we only have a few minutes left, but I want to take you through a quick tour of part of the JAN website that you can use to look for accommodation ideas on your own. This is JAN's searchable online accommodation resource. And to get to it, you go to askjan.org and click on Search Accommodations Database. Then you come to this screen and click on the little picture of the magnifying glass. After that, you're going to come to a page where you can select the impairment that the person is experiencing. So for this example, we're going to pick deaf or hard of hearing. That'll take you to a little explanation of that condition. And we're going to go ahead and click on the limitation that the person is experiencing. We're going to say they're experiencing deafness or that they are hard of hearing. Next, there comes a list of different things that a person might need to do on the job. So you pick the one that you want to learn more about. And just as an example, we're going to click on Taking Vital Signs because that's something that comes up a lot in healthcare settings. And that page will take you to some options. So for instance, there are amplified stethoscopes that are a little bit louder, that you hear heart sounds at a higher decibel level. There are also various hearing aid compatible stethoscopes, and even some that are what we call visual stethoscopes, where you can actually see an image representing the sound that you're trying to hear. And if you were to click on where it says amplified stethoscope, you would then come to a list that's generated from the JAN database. And these aren't in any particular order. We don't endorse or recommend products, but you'll see some vendors and some examples of products. And then we would encourage you to visit those vendor websites or maybe call them to get more details about the product and about pricing. So if you would like to talk more in depth on any of these topics, you can contact the Job Accommodation Network at 1-800-526-7234. Or if you're using a TTY, you can reach us at 877-781-9403. You can also just go to askjan.org if you want to view the website, or send an email to jan@askjan.org. And someone will get back to you. If you'd like to read a little bit more about the Job Accommodation Network, the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, has an article up on their website that talks about our history and what we do. And what I'm going to try to do is paste that information into the chat window so that you'll have the link. If you would like to know more about us, you can certainly go there or go to the website. And that's all that I have for today. Thank you so much for the opportunity
Thank you again,
to speak
Teresa.
with you.
Great information from you and Chuck. We are running out of time fairly quickly, so I'll go ahead and post the questions that we can. And the first question, I believe, is for Chuck. Tony in Michigan would like to know, are there incentives for employers to hire people with disabilities?
Yes, this is Chuck, and that is an excellent question. If you go to askjan.org and search for tax incentives, you'll come on a page that gives numerous answers. The Work Opportunity Tax Credit is one. Disabled Access Credit is another. It's quite a list here, and maybe you will be able to fit into one of those niches there and be able to take advantage, or your employer will be able to take advantage of the work of the incentive.
Okay, thank you. Tony would also like to know, can you comment on the difficulties of passing a phone interview when we have hearing loss?
I think that might be better answered by Teresa. I saw that question and I thought it might be better answered by Teresa.
It's a good question, since a lot of people don't want to disclose their hearing loss at that point of the employment process.
Yeah, that can be a little bit tricky. To be honest, some people will choose to go through a relay service in order to have really excellent communication. If you want to have any type of modification to the interview process, like if you were, for instance, wanting to do it by instant messaging rather than on the phone, or if you wanted to have the chance at a live interview versus a telephone interview, in order to get that as an accommodation, you're almost going to have to disclose the disability. So I think that's something you really have to take on a case-by-case basis. If you do want to, say, borrow a telephone amplifier, say for the day of the interview, you may be able to do that through your state assistive technology project. So that could be a possibility. You might be able to self-accommodate, for lack of a better word. But if you want the employer to modify the interview in any way, whether by doing it in person instead of on the phone or using instant messaging instead of the phone, you can ask without disclosing, but usually you're going to have to disclose a disability in order to get an accommodation. I hope that helps.
Mm-hmm. Samantha would like to know, is there a time limit on when the employer is supposed to provide the accommodation? It usually would take 6 months to a year for something to be provided.
Yeah, that's an unusual amount of time. An employer, according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is supposed to act expeditiously and avoid unnecessary delays. So unless there's something unusual about the accommodation such that it takes a long time, like building a ramp or installing an elevator or something like that, I'd say that 6 months sounds like a lot. In the federal sector, there are more definable time limits, expectations in terms of time. But as far as Title I of the ADA goes, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission says employers should act expeditiously and avoid unnecessary delays. If you think your employer is not doing that, you can certainly file a complaint with the EEOC.
Burl commented that he works with people with, or veterans with disabilities, vision loss, hearing loss, and also some amputees. And he wants to know, does Jan interact with the VA medical centers? And an earlier question was, how does he know what can be provided or what should be provided, and when to know when somebody's being discriminated against? Loaded question there.
Well, I would say you can always contact the Job Accommodation Network to talk about your situation in a confidential way and for free if you would like to do that. We don't cold call other organizations on someone's behalf. We speak with the caller and try to help them come up with a direction to go. And we talk with them about the different options for seeking redress by filing a complaint, that sort of thing. So if you think your situation sounds a little bit fishy and you just want to talk it over, you could certainly contact the Job Accommodation Network for that. We can talk in general terms about the types of things that tend to be provided, the types of options that we tend to discuss with employers, but we can't say for sure what your employer is going to provide. You really don't know what that's going to be until you go through the process.
It sounds like it was quite a process for Sharon to finally get CART services provided for her at her place of employment. And her boss, though, keeps telling her how expensive it is and doesn't want her to use it too much. That's not fair, is it?
Oh, that's another one of those loaded questions, isn't it? And to be honest, the total amount that an employer needs to consider paying depends on their total financial resources. So if an employer has a lot of financial resources, big company, lots of money coming in, it's going to be most likely more difficult for them to show what we call undue hardship. Undue hardship means that something is so expensive or so difficult to provide, the language that's in the law is it causes significant difficulty or expense, that the employer really just can't do it. They need to look at some other options. But for a very small mom and pop company, yeah, using CART services on a frequent basis for long periods, that's going to run up a lot of costs. It's going to be a big bill to pay. But for a larger company with more resources, it may be a drop in the bucket. So that's one of those things that's highly individualized. Now, if somebody thinks that their employer is discriminating against them, they can always contact us to talk it over. But if they want to file a complaint, they would do that with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or perhaps with their State Human Rights Commission.
Okay, I'll take one more. I think we're almost to the end here. Drew says, for Teresa, I am a CFSLP about to begin my fellowship at a skilled nursing facility. I have a recent diagnosis of APD, which is specific to dichotic listening during background noise. Should I mention this to my employer? Are there any compensatory strategies that you would recommend?
Well, to be honest, because I'm not working with you directly in a clinical capacity, I'm a little leery of recommending specific compensatory strategies. But if you would like to contact the Job Accommodation Network, I would be happy to speak with you. You can ask for me. If you want to use instant messaging, you can also do that through our website. So I would definitely invite you to get in contact with me privately. But here's the rule of thumb. If you want the employer to do something differently, to make an accommodation, it's usually hard to get them to do that without actually disclosing the condition. You can try, but usually they're going to be leery of making too many changes without triggering what we call the interactive process, and that usually is going to require you disclosing at some point. What some people will do is kind of try the situation and see how they get by on their own, but other people find that they really do want to disclose early on. Now, if something is affecting your performance, one thing that the EEOC suggests is to go ahead and disclose and request accommodation before the problem gets too serious, so that you don't wind up getting written up on your job. So it kind of depends on how you feel it's impacting you in the workplace. One strategy that can be helpful is if you have a good relationship with your coworkers, try to get them to use techniques to communicate with you that work well for you, like having good eye contact during conversations, not turning away when they are speaking to you. But if you need something equipment-based that the employer would need to purchase, then you really might want to disclose. But you might want to talk to whatever clinicians are working with you as well to see what strategies they recommend. I hope that helps.
Perfect. I think we'll end there, and I just want to let people know that if you're new to HLAA and you haven't been to our work site or our website, we have a really great employment toolkit available there. And if you're not a member, please join us. We're doing some great work, and we need our grassroots to be strong and help us with our work. And there's a lot of information on our website about employment. Chuck and Teresa, thank you very much. I think we could probably go on all night. There's so much great information here, but maybe you will present again. I'm always open to that if we can find a date. Thanks again. Good night, everybody.